As much as I like to cover news coverage back to back to compare who's saying what and what's being covered or not, I do like to follow the order of events as they're going in court, especially since the Jonathan Majors trial isn't televised. We kind of have to put the pieces of the puzzle together to get the best idea of what's going on in the courtroom, the order it's happening in, and how the jury might be experiencing it. So I wanted to do a video focusing specifically on the testimony of Chloe Zoller. Now, in the photo here on my screen, that's Grace Jabari circled in the red, and Chloe Zoller is the one standing like shoulder to shoulder with her there. This is from surveillance footage from Lucy's nightclub, and I'm using it because it's involved in the trial, and I'm not trying to put these people's private lives on blast. I'm working from a variety of sources, largely sourced from Danny Does Law and Laura Italiano, who writes for Business Insider. Some of the other details are things that you may have heard in the overall recap video I did yesterday, but this is going to be a much more comprehensive look at Chloe Zoller's testimony. And I believe her testimony took just over 30 minutes if we go by the reporter's timestamps. And going through it in the order of how she was questioned through direct and then on cross-examination, and then there's a little bit of redirect, you'll get a better idea of what it was like to be sitting in that courtroom hearing it and forming your own opinion about it, which I would love to hear as we go. So Chloe Zoller is the blonde girl from the Sidewalk Friends video. She's dating Max with the hat, who ends up testifying after her for like a really short amount of time. She gets on the stand as the first witness yesterday. And her friends were about to go out and leave for a birthday party to celebrate her birthday. So let's walk through her testimony. And remember, this is the prosecution's line of questioning at this point in time on direct. At the time that Chloe and her friends step out to the sidewalk about to, initiate the rest of their night, Chloe admits that she'd already had a few drinks and was intoxicated, but insists she had no problems understanding things that were happening around her. Zoller testified, quote, "I noticed they were talking to someone I did not know," describing her first encounter with Grace Jabari. And she notes that they all spoke for a few minutes. When asked about Jonathan Majors, Zoller stated that he proceeded to pass right past us and around the corner. Now, we know in the public that, this video footage gets cut off. And then when asked about Jabari, Zoller says, "I didn't recall her saying anything, just that she was flustered, crying, upset." After Jabari follows Jonathan, and that's where we kind of see it go off camera in that public surveillance video, Zoller says she proceeded to follow the two of them around a corner. She says she doesn't remember anything they were saying, but says they were on the corner for a long time, like 30 minutes. I'm going to start saying Chloe. Chloe testified that at some point the driver came around this corner and met up with them, and that I'm assuming Chloe and the group of friends, thought they were going to send them both home. But then Jabari and Majors, run out of the car and were both upset, very upset. The friends were trying to figure out where they could send the two of them, separately, of course. So Chloe testified that she enters the car with Grace at this point and, she wants to try to take her home. But Chloe says that, she was already really late to this birthday party for her celebration, and she decides to just invite Grace to come in the Uber to head off to their party. So now Jabari and the friends are all in the Uber. And Chloe says that Jabari was a lot calmer during this ride. And then there's another demeanor shift. When they get to Lucy's, Chloe testifies that Grace then goes to order a bottle of champagne and tequila shots. And she notes that Grace's demeanor shifts to a lighter, happier state at this time. The prosecution starts asking questions about what they're doing after they get their drinks. And Chloe says, "I believe Grace and I sat on the couch for a little bit together." So the prosecution asks more questions about what was going on while they're sitting on this couch. And Chloe says about Jabari, about Grace, that while we were sitting there, she informed me that her finger was hurting. I grabbed a piece of ice from the bucket and I held it to her finger. Chloe goes on to testify that she doesn't remember taking a selfie on the dance floor with Jabari, and they know that they have the selfie. And I believe she was asked something about realizing whether or not Grace's eyes were closed in the photo, to suggest maybe that she looks drunk in the photo. Zoller says, "I don't recall." And she doesn't remember exactly how many times she hugged Jabari or hugging her at all at certain points where it's shown on the video surveillance footage. To close out direct questioning, the prosecution asks Chloe about, their current friendship status between her and Grace. And she says they're not friends and they do not keep contact, and that she actually last saw Chloe that night, so March 25th, 2023. And if you're wondering why the prosecution would ask this, it's likely to suggest there's no reason for Chloe to come up here and lie about anything. So then the prosecution turns the witness over to the defense. So we're now in cross-examination. Seth Zuckerman gets right up and asks, "What finger did you apply the ice to?" And Chloe can't remember. He starts asking about injuries, and Chloe states that she didn't notice any injuries on Grace, neither when they first met earlier in the night or at Lucy's, but she does note that it was quite dark inside of Lucy's, which, is a club. He asks about if Jabari complained about pain, and she says, no, can't remember that. And about any blood transfer from any of the times that they hugged or, leaned into each other. Chloe testifies, no transfer of blood. Now we've got some complete quotes for the next series of questions. You didn't observe any marks on her face? No. On her neck? No. On her ear? On her finger? No and no. In regards to the ice, she doesn't recall the finger it was applied to, and she doesn't remember Grace expressing any pain when holding hands throughout the rest of the night. At least twice, Zoller and Jabari hug each other during the night, and their ears appear to press together. So Zuckerman's honing in on this line of questioning. Did you ever find any blood on your clothes? So she's seeing this video with the ear parting and all the hugs, and Zoller's like, no. And remember, she's wearing a white shirt. Seth Zuckerman moves on to other types of questions to get more context about the night. Chloe does testify she remembers Grace saying it was Jonathan Major's credit card at some point, but doesn't remember how the conversation went. Zuckerman asks if Zoller remembers vaping and smoking with Grace, and Chloe says potentially, and I believe so. And then Seth starts asking questions about earlier in the night. So, when you first see Jonathan Majors, did you notice anything? And Chloe says she recalls seeing tears on his face. Seth asks if Chloe remembers Jonathan and Grace yelling. And she says she doesn't recall, but that she may have used the term that she heard Grace yelling at Jonathan. And then Seth drills down on the part where Jonathan and Grace get into the Escalade right in front of them and where she said they had ran right out. He asks how long were they in there, and she says it was about 30 seconds before they both came running out. And then Seth shows more pictures and videos to demonstrate any ear bumping and contact with the white shirt throughout the night, as well as a video of Jabari walking into a wall and noticeably stumbling. And Chloe doesn't recall that, but when shown the video, she agrees that that's what she's seeing. And then they show videos of Chloe and Grace holding hands as they're exiting the building. Seth asks about if and when Chloe has met with the DA, and she says that she met with them once in April and then once last week. And then to close it out, Zuckerman asks about physical contact between Majors and Jabari, Jonathan and Grace. She says, they were touching physically, but I don't recall anything of that nature, meaning seeing any assault. So the defense is done with Chloe, and the prosecution comes back up for a quick redirect. On direct, Assistant District Attorney Michael Perez gets up and says, throughout any of the hugging, was there any point where you made contact with the back of her ear? Not that I'm aware, Chloe answered. Seth asks and Zoller answers that she did not look at Grace's finger at all, and that Chloe does not remember at any time throughout the night seeing Chloe hit her head, or her finger being hit, or Grace falling anywhere. And then the prosecution is done with redirect. So the prosecution seems to be trying to establish two things here, namely that Grace had asked for a piece of ice for her finger, and also that Chloe didn't witness anything else in the moment of the club that could have been the impact injury to the finger, or a bump to the head, or a fall. Now, the reason that's so important is because it could help rule out the possibility that Grace injured her finger while in the penthouse if her finger was already hurting while in the club. And that's just my opinion. That's my take on the prosecution's angle there. The second thing that they wanted to establish is that Chloe has no reason to lie. It seems like the defense and the prosecution both wanted to establish that Chloe wasn't going to remember everything and that she may have been intoxicated at the time they met each other on the sidewalk. And the reason that kind of works for both parties is because they're both looking for Chloe to remember certain things but not remember other things possibly. So it's kind of like a mutual thing that they are both comfortable eliciting throughout cross and throughout direct and cross. And then the defense seems to really want to establish that whatever happened with the back of the ear, that there was no apparent bleeding from the ear throughout any parts of the night. It wasn't noticed on her. It was never stated that there was something wrong with the ear. It was never mentioned that, hey, what is this? And even though surveillance footage shows some of that rubbing up on the white shirt, there's no blood or any transfer of blood to the clothing that Chloe could have noticed in the morning. Even if she wasn't the most in tune in the moment, she could have noticed on the shirt later that night or the next morning. And one other thing I think is worth thinking about is on direct and cross, we both see some type of testimony about, are they yelling at each other and then they both get in this car and they get out? And it was only 30 seconds, which matches what we've heard as the public, what this video looked like. So on the video shows Jonathan and Jabari getting in one side of the car, and then Majors exits on the other side of the car, like almost right away. And then Jabari gets out also. So if they get in on the side of the sidewalk where the friends are standing, the friends might not have a view of the opposite side door, at least on the outside facing part. Witness testimony is limited to the direction and what they're able to hear and correctly recall. But that video gave us some insight, at least according to the people who saw it and described what was happening in it. The video gives us some insight onto what happened on the opposite side door as they exit the vehicle. And then as far as the yelling line, so on cross, Seth Zuckerman hones in and says, did you hear Jonathan Majors yelling? Did you hear Grace yelling? She's like, I don't really recall. I don't recall. I don't recall what they were yelling. But she says that as far as Grace, she thinks she may have used the term yelling to describe Grace yelling at Jonathan. I thought that was interesting because it seems like Chloe may have said that in her April statement, and maybe she doesn't have a good recollection today. And if you don't recall something today, you're not supposed to try to force yourself to recall it. That's not something you should do as a witness under oath. But she is describing that she may have used that term before, so it's my guess. I'm thinking she described Grace as yelling at Jonathan Majors when she gave her interview with the prosecution in April, and just wanted to be clear that she thinks she said that at some point. But I think that's interesting because we've heard rumblings that the judge did not want audio of this sidewalk moment to be played. And we know that Priya Chaudhry questioned Grace Jabari on cross-examination if she was screaming or shrieking at Jonathan Majors during this point. And she said no, she was not screaming at him. She wouldn't characterize it that way. But the judge doesn't want to let that audio in because it's not clear who's who in the audio, even though there's only one woman with a British accent. So me personally, I'm putting the testimony from Chloe that she thinks she may have used the term yelling to describe Grace yelling at Jonathan Majors around this point in time. I'm putting it side by side with that context and assuming it's from that same video where we're not allowed to hear audio. So to me, it seems like Seth Zuckerman and Priya Chaudhry, both in their respective lines of questioning with different witnesses, were trying to establish that Grace was yelling at Jonathan Majors still after the chase had ended. She was still continuing to yell at Jonathan Majors on the sidewalk as the events continued on, even though they can't get that audio of it introduced. So that was a really important question. I thought it was a really interesting answer that she thinks she may have described Grace as yelling at Jonathan previously. But that's all. I hope you enjoyed this format, and I think it's a little bit easier to digest how testimony sounded and flowed in the courtroom when we can kind of put all of the information together from different sources in one chronological order. If and when transcripts become available for this case, I do want to grab them, and at that point in time, we can all look through exactly the question and answer and what was happening. But working with what we've got across different sources from the different news outlets, and then especially from Danny Does Law and Laura Italiano who writes for Business Insider. I haven't mentioned her much because I think she's been working on other reporting, other cases. But Laura Italiano was the one who did a lot of the original Insider articles, breaking down the surveillance footage, the letter to the defense, and the motion to dismiss. She has done some great coverage on this case prior, very detailed. It's not like you get 2 sentences and then you're fending for yourself to find out more information. So to see her back covering the case yesterday was really great, and I wanted to bring it all together. I hope this gave you a great picture of how Chloe Zoller's testimony went yesterday. And you guys take care.